Hello, and welcome to Creating the Life You Love, how to live a spiritual life in a 3D reality. I am your host, Valeria Bruno, and this is a space where you will find the tools for your personal and spiritual development, so you can live a fulfilled life in the magnificence of your being. And this is also a space where we can openly talk about science, spirituality, and even go beyond. My welcome guest today is Dr. Jean Ang. Welcome, Jean. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Hello, Valeria. It's very wonderful to be here, and I feel honored. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So I would like to introduce you to the audience by reading your bio. Dr. Jean Ang began his training in human biology, philosophy, and religious studies at Stanford University, where I did my PhD, and completed a doctorate in neurobiology at Yale University. After his postdoctoral fellowship, Jean decided to step into the role of a facilitator of healing in order to directly interact with helping people. Most of his work centers around the use of subtle energy to help align the subtle energy body, its channels, meridian, the energy centers, to help restore balance and harmony so that healing can occur, whether it be physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual. Jean is trained in a variety of healing modalities, including pranic healing, reconnective healing, shamanic healing, and vortex healing. And he sees himself as part of the interconnectedness that occurs when the facilitator, the client, source, love, interact to bring healing forth. Jean has his practice in California, and he teaches and speaks internationally all over the world. So welcome again, Jean. Before we start talking about your work, I would like to know, how did you make the transition from being a neurobiologist in Yale into becoming a healer? And what is healing? What is your point of view about healing?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It was a gradual process, though, of course, when people from the outside hear about the shift, it seems like quite a strong or kind of almost moving in the opposite direction. But I would say when I was in college already, that's when the internal shift occurred. In my sophomore year, I started to study a spiritual text called A Course in Miracles. And I think that was what made the biggest change in terms of my internal development into a more spiritual outlook. And I would say I studied that book intensively for about 5 years. So through college and then a couple years after. So even though externally most of my spiritual path was not visible, still doing things like taking graduate school work and then doing my PhD, internally I was focused a lot in the spiritual development. And then I think these two paths came together, both the internal and the external path, after I finished my PhD and was concluding with my postdoctoral fellowship, which I also did at Yale. And I think that allowed me to bring those two together. Like I had perhaps completed what I needed to do in the external world from a soul perspective, and then could then bring this other internal line together. So after my PhD, or actually during my PhD, I was studying with energy healers and energy modalities, both just personally, with particularly a Russian shamanic healer from Siberia who had immigrated to Brooklyn Beach, which was close to New Haven at the time. And then started to study with a number of different energy modalities that are sort of known in the public, such as pranic healing and vortex healing and reconnective healing. And then finally, I did 3-year shamanic training once I had already went into healing. And I think that was really what culminated in what became, which we may talk about later, the healing modality that I've been facilitating both in trainings and in sessions for others, called the Arcturian healing method. Maybe I'll pause there to see if you had any questions. I know you asked me about my
Yes, I
philosophy.
wanted to know about the experience you had with the reconnection, because for me it has been life-changing. I had a very strong experience when I received the reconnection, because I don't know where they took me, but I had the opportunity to meet all the races of the universe, not all the galaxy. And the elders disassembled my body and reassembled it, and then they introduced me to my spiritual guides. So I know that also for you, reconnection was very important.
Yes, that was, I would say, pivotal in terms of me shifting from, let's say, medical science career in research into healing. I had been studying a number of modalities for maybe 2 or 3 years with, and I was in my postdoctoral fellowship with the sort of deep soul level call or sense that I wanted to go into healing.
Yeah.
But there were still deep energetic ties, almost like in the movie The Matrix, that wouldn't allow me to leave that sort of role in science and then move into healing. And for me, although I don't think it's necessarily universal, it's maybe it's a personal, like you said, the reconnection was very helpful to you. But for me also, the reconnection actually, I could feel it allowed me, of the many things that also happened to me, I felt that it helped me to release those energetic connections to the, like my former life or profession, and move into the new healing role. So there's many other things I also had experienced, but the reconnection was a big part of that movement into healing for my personal story.
So this is something that I would like for you to share for the scientific community who is watching this interview. The word healing is not very well accepted in the mainstream scientific community. And maybe if we talk about energy, is more understood. So could you please tell me what is energy and how we can use it to improve both our personal and spiritual life?
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of answer the question that you had asked previously, is a movement into the question about energy, about healing, like just my sense of what that means to me. I think like, so in, contradistinction or possibly to cause a conflict with what we see as medical science, I don't see healing as necessarily a change in symptoms,
Yeah.
and but more from another level of bringing wholeness or balance, and whether those changes include some change on the physical plane, or like you mentioned, the energetic or emotional plane. That's usually left to the person's own sort of, or the whoever the client or the patient is, to their own system to manifest. So I think coming from the scientific community and doing now healing for the last let's see, maybe 15 or to 20 years, I think as long as there's not like these strong claims from healers that they're changing, they can necessarily change something in the physical world, but that you're more letting nature, being a facilitating nature to take its natural course. I think that sort of allows science to take its role, and to healers to allow their role in sort of this universal process. Uh, uh, The energy world is the model that I kind of see is that you have the physical body, and then the framework usually that energy healers or different healing traditions use is that there are other subtle bodies that are non-physical. They're just as important or as real as the physical world. And so the next more subtle sort of dimension after that sort of imbues the physical world is this life force energy,
Yeah.
or this energy body. And so and then the other subtle bodies, just to mention them, which we may or may not talk about later, after the energy body is the emotional body, mental body. And so I use a 7-body model system, then the causal or karmic body, spiritual body, and finally the divine body. And we can define those later, but the key point is that the people who are usually working in the energy world as facilitators are working in these non-physical dimensions, which can have an eventual effect, let's say, in the physical world.
Yeah. And I think that now we can also start measuring something like the energy that we receive or that we amplify during meditation, for instance. It can be measured. I remember once at the neuroscience meeting, they invited for the opening lecture the Dalai Lama. So he started practicing meditation, and there was a neurophysiologist who was measuring the changes in the body. So I think that this energy, of course, not all of it, but it can start being measured, and possibly in the future we could measure it also, no?
Yes. I'm not sure if you're aware of this trilogy of books by Claude Swanson, who
No.
is a theoretical physicist who's written about more scientific models on these different spiritual phenomena, such as energy healing, orbs, ley lines, and even more esoteric topics, which we may discuss. But he also has kind of created this idea of a multidimensional model where the physical world is basically the particles in the physical world are at one frequency. And then these other subtle dimensional worlds that I mentioned are at another frequency. And if our consciousness is not tuned into that frequency, we basically don't sense those other dimensions. But like you mentioned, mostly people can develop their state of consciousness. We may call them clairvoyants or seers, so that they can shift their consciousness to begin to perceive these other sort of frequencies and dimensional states that are sort of within our own space right now. But if our consciousness is not tuned into them, they become sort of non-visible to us or non-sensory to us. So these different models are starting to help create possible experiments, like you said. And then as maybe there's tools or instruments that begin to measure these subtle dimensions, as those become more refined in the future, then it may become more acceptable to a scientific paradigm.
Yeah, but for instance, just being at home, we can increase our energy, or we can amplify our biofield, I don't know how to call it, just by breathing. You are a breatharian healer. I am also a breatharian healer. So can you explain to the audience how breath can help in aligning with all our bodies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just to kind of dovetail on the explanation of the subtle bodies, the etheric or the biofield, and I was using the term etheric dimension, or they sometimes call it the pranic dimension, is very closely entwined with the physical dimension, and it sort of energizes the physical dimension. And then our thoughts, feelings, and emotions, what powers them is also the etheric dimension. So the more thoughts and feelings we're having, the more we sort of consume this etheric energy. But when you perceive someone or something living that has a lot of this bioenergy, it tends to be brighter, more alive. And the prana, or the air, has this prana in it, or this bioenergy. So we're naturally, when we're breathing, using this more, what might be called a multidimensional model, we're on the etheric level, we're absorbing this pranic energy, and it also enlivens us, this bioenergy field. Now, if you consciously regulate your breathing, which a lot of these different spiritual traditions, as well as yogic traditions and martial arts, have been working on for hundreds of years, then you can accumulate a lot of this pranic energy in your field, and then use it for healing and performance, or strengthening the body to even maximal levels, such as you might see in a gymnast or a martial artist or a yogic practitioner or a healer. And usually it's this rhythmic breathing that allows that rhythmic conscious breathing. Just to break that down a little bit, when you're inhaling and holding your breath, then you exhale and you hold your breath. If the longer you hold your breath, whether it's on the inhale or the exhale, if you're trying to accumulate this pranic energy, it's during those periods of the breath hold. So that's one aspect of energizing. And then you can also use the breath, just to finish this explanation, to relax the system. And so that period occurs if you lengthen the exhale. So whenever the exhale is probably longer than the inhale period, then your system will begin to relax or go into a more parasympathetic mode. So there's various things you can do with the breath in a rapid way to change not only the physiology, which is well explained by medical science, but also this next subtle dimension called the etheric or biofield energy.
Yes, I do. I studied pranic healing, and we breathe until we stop breathing. We call it the breathless moment. And my master told us that when you are in the breathless, so you stop breathing after you breathe, of course, a lot. You are breathed by the universe, so you are receiving energy from the universe, and then of course it can flow through all of your bodies. And I think that maybe these breathing practices should be taught even at school, because they are a useful tool for everyone, so not just for healing but for relaxing, even for be concentrated. So I think it's very important. It's really important talking generally about breathing. So now I think we can move a little beyond. And I would like to ask you, what is your Arcturian healing method and how did you receive it?
Mhm. Yeah, usually one way to understand that from different perspectives that people are coming through is what I mentioned is I did a shamanic healing training quite extensively with a school called the Foundation for Shamanic Studies that was started by Michael Harner in the United States, and now it's international. But that, much like someone might go to, do graduate work or like medical school, that kind of gives them the tools then to kind of take it to their own next level, whether they become a practitioner or a researcher. So those gave me the tools in a spiritual sense to understand how the spiritual world works, particularly from a healing perspective, as that school was a shamanic school for healing. There's different purposes of shamanism. But just to describe the framework in shamanism is that a practitioner is learning to work with these altered states of consciousness, these what I'm kind of just colloquially calling the spiritual world or inner dimensions, and particularly working with other beings or spirits, you might call it, in those other worlds. So it's a very non-physical model. It's not necessarily a scientific materialist model. To facilitate, in this case, healing. And so the healing modality that I kind of facilitate is working with particular spiritual beings. You can think of them as like helping spirits in the shamanic term, called the Arcturians. There is a star, a physical star called Arcturus, but in this model, what I'm interacting with more, teaching people to interact, is these other inner dimensions of that star, you could say. So more of the spiritual world. And these higher beings or spiritual beings called Arcturians are here to help benefit other beings, the planet, spaces, animals, with certain energies or frequencies that are sourced from the divine, and they come through this lens of these this particular consciousness called the Arcturians, and then through the practitioner to the client. So that's the general framework for that healing, this healing type of healing.
So you do not consider yourself Arcturian, because right now we are starting remembering our galactic origins, and we feel more called to a star family or to another one. So do you think that the Arcturians are in your soul or monadic lineage, or is a spiritual connection that we have with them?
Mm-hmm. Probably I have it in my, like what you mentioned, the solar monadic connection or my soul connection. I tend not to think about it a lot or make it a big deal within or just, it hasn't really come to mind all that much. But probably an outside observer would, just because facilitating the modality and those type of healing sessions, predominantly Arcturian, that they probably would think that I'm connected to that sort of lineage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if to which dimension Arcturians belong, seventh, ninth. Everyone says something different. For sure, I consider them the healers of the galaxy. This is my personal point of view. And I had also personal experience with them once. I was driving to go to teach. So I was in the car and suddenly I saw a double helix of the DNA in the street and starting hearing some voices. So I stopped. I took my notebook. I have always my download notebooks. And they just gave me a sort of modality for corrupted genes, especially the one of inherited diseases. So for this, I consider them the healers, because all the time I connect with her, I can download a different kind of healing. But you also provide sessions about these Arcturian transmissions that are so silent. So it's something really strange, because everyone can experience something different. How do you think this energy transmission can help us in our spiritual development or in ascension, if we are already on an ascension path?
Yeah, we can talk about that. Just in case you wanted to, we could do a little sample for people.
Oh yes, thank you,
yeah,
please.
Yeah, sure. And even if someone's listening to this, obviously through the recording, they can also get the energy, and I can explain that a little bit so that people can kind of bridge to that in case that's sort of a new idea. But I think these energies, that's why I think in my own development in understanding this, because I was coming from a very strong scientific model into this more spiritual one, the energy work before I got into this, maybe you'd call it more esoteric even aspect with the Arcturians and spiritual beings. That's the bridge. So once you've had some experiences, let's say you're coming from a very strong scientific model and experience of the world, a more three-dimensional model, and to experience these sort of frequencies, if you've had some experience in this pranic dimension or energy dimension, then the step into feeling a frequency from a spiritual being is much easier than if one's coming from a strictly physical model of the world. But these frequencies, they're working through consciousness. They're working on the non-physical bodies, like the energetic body, but also these higher bodies. And this is maybe how the effect has on one's spiritual development. I mentioned there's other more subtle bodies, the emotional, mental, that's a little bit understandable. And then to someone maybe who is new to that. And then the causal body is what's called like our karmic body, which is just a body of information of all the feelings, thoughts, physical actions, whatever we made sort of intentional or even unconscious action on those levels is stored in this information field. Then the spiritual body is our soul information. And then everything we've ever done as a soul in this framework, and even those that we might be doing in the future. It's a very interesting time model. And then finally, the divine dimension is the non-dual dimension where our consciousness is unified with the source or Godhead. So these frequencies is really a consciousness, and these frequencies from the Arcturians, they're working on all these subtle dimensions of ourselves, all the way up to the divine. So etheric, emotional, mental, causal, spiritual, and divine. And that's what allows our higher self or our consciousness to accelerate its development, is that interacting with these higher frequencies can also cause us to accelerate our development on these other subtle bodies, that if we weren't exposed to this sort of external or this other consciousness, we may not go or open up to our own potential as fast. So it's really an unfolding of our own system, much like physical healing ultimately is still facilitated by the physical body's natural intelligence, whatever the external agent might be, if it's a drug or a supplement or surgery or radiation. The same way on these other subtle bodies, these external exposures to other consciousness are really accelerating our own unpacking of our natural soul information or inner information.
So it's something that you teach, that you provide to your client. You teach a lot of courses, but we could also consider it a form of self-healing. So is how much you allow to receive, the better it is, of course, for your development. So it's a self-healing too.
Yes, it's a self-healing tool. And maybe that could be added to the, what my sense or definition of healing is ultimately it's a self-healing, whatever the external agent might be, facilitated by a healer or a therapist or a physician or nurse or whoever might be facilitating that. It's sort of helping the natural process of healing, and it just depends on what body level we're referring to, physical or these non-physical dimensions.
Yes, and I remember, of course, the journey is personal, because these frequencies, as we will see now, they are silent. But I remember when I did with you the Arcturian whales frequency, that I saw so many geometric patterns that were looking like sacred geometry, but not the usual Platonic solids that we are used to see. So they also transmit through symbols?
Yes, yes. They can transmit through various geometrical symbols, and maybe to help people understand that who are new to that, I call that a form of divine pact information or pact information.
Okay.
So like you had referred to the term download, your download notebook. I like that's very nice. But people might think of this as energetic information that your consciousness can receive from other beings, other consciousness, whether it's another human being or another spiritual being, or even a group field, like a group of consciousness. You know, whenever a group forms together, you form a group field. And the way the metaphor that probably helps now in this modern age is a bit like when someone downloads something from a server, like a very big file. Let's say it's a terabyte. That terabyte could contain a lot of information. Let's say they're all PDF files. So you can receive this packed information. It's a bit like receiving that terabyte. And there's a certain way to receive that, or you can train yourself to receive it fully. And then when you begin reading those PDF files like one by one, and a terabyte worth of PDF is probably quite a lot. But when you read them, that would be called unpacking the information. So the metaphor would be, we can receive these energetic information from, let's say, another consciousness. We usually do that. The best way is to be silent. So if the metaphor is, let's say we're downloading a terabyte onto your computer, if you start to try to open those files, it usually crashes the download. So when you're receiving the spiritual download, if you start to go into your discursive mind, if you start to try to talk to the information or try to even make it into pictures forcefully or even with your intention, it will stop the transmission into your subtle bodies, or something of this nature. So you wait silently if you can for the full download. And then after that, let's say after the meditation, you can begin to unpack or sort of read those files, those PDF files metaphorically. So that's sort of a way spiritual communication occurs between beings.
So this doesn't require our logical mind that, of course, I'm a neuroscientist, mine is very, very strong, but is going at a deeper level. So then I can open subconsciously, or in my consciousness, I can start opening all what I received. So yes, we could provide this experience to the audience. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So people could just relax. If you've meditated before, you don't have to meditate, but you could just be quiet. And if you're driving or something while you're listening to this or doing something active, you don't have to stop. You can listen to this later again when you're more relaxed, just to be more aware of what's happening. But it won't change your consciousness at the moment when you're doing something active. Okay, so what we're experiencing are some Arcturian healing method frequencies. And if you have a certain healing intention, either to heal something physically, energetically, emotionally, mentally, just state that you'd like the healing frequencies to work on that. Then the only other thing to note is what I will state the frequency or energy I'm using. And then like what Valeria mentioned, I'm usually quiet while it's happening. Okay, until the next frequency.
Right.
So we're starting with the short Arcturian healing method healing session. And we're starting with a frequency called the Arcturian dimensional bridge. If you have that healing intention silently, you could just say that the energies will be working on that healing intention. If you don't have anything specific, the energies have their own intelligence, so they'll go to wherever is most needed. And continuing to channel the Arcturian dimensional bridge healing frequency. Now we're channeling the Metatron Melchizedek Arcturian Mandala healing frequency. Continuing to channel the Metatron Melchizedek Arcturian Mandala healing frequency. And the third and final frequency is called the Arcturian shadow frequency. And this works on a vibratory body called your shadow, which is the same as the shadow that your body casts from a light source. And that completes the session. You can gently but firmly come back to your physical body now. When you feel comfortable, you can open your eyes and snap your fingers.
Thank you, Jean. That was, sorry, I need to ground a little bit. I felt totally spaceless and timeless. So the expansion was, especially with the first one, because with the second one, Metatron is my main guide. So I felt like going to reach him. And I think that especially in these so challenging times, all these frequencies can really anchor us to the planet and go beyond our everyday worries. I was thinking, but it's us that we are more open to receive these frequencies, or these helpers are coming now. What I would like to understand, if it's us that the help has always been there, but we are ready to receive it, or it's a particular time for them to come help us.
Yeah. Well, I really like how you presented the question. I think that's a very key point, is the receptivity of, we can think of collectively as humanity, or a greater portion of humanity. Because we have been, and maybe for very good reasons, in a very strong, scientific materialist model, mostly focused on the physical world. And that helped to, as humanity, not necessarily individually, but although that, of course, that's important too, in order to develop certain things on the planet, such as technology and science. And then now, as we're finding that we need sort of a broader model, and maybe this manifests as what we individually or collectively call like crises or problems. They could be seen, like you presented, as catalysts, actually, of consciousness development. So when we're looking for more solutions, we don't necessarily have to throw away the things we found effective, like technology and developments on that level, but also combining these other, maybe perhaps what I'm calling multidimensional models. Then we become more receptive to, let's say, this other consciousness that have, my sense is they probably have been there, whether you call them angelic presences, spiritual beings like Metatron, ascended masters, or star beings. But these beings, they don't impose their will on other beings such as ourselves. So that's why I think the receptivity is very important. And this could take many years, many even lifetimes, for an individual to become receptive fully to that help. But from maybe a larger perspective, that's still a short amount of time if we're looking at eternity. So, yes. But yeah, we're kind of here in this particular space-time arena, and like you said, with the pandemic, perhaps this is a very, it can be looked at two ways, but maybe in a positive light, is a very strong catalyst for a large-scale evolution of consciousness.
Yeah, this is what I think too. And more we expand our consciousness, of course, we are used to do it because it's our path, our mission. But more we work on it, more people we reach it in an easier way. This is my thought. And the last thing I would like to ask you, because it's really, really helpful to know, is how we can use our consciousness or our awareness, maybe is the more correct word, during the sleep time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I've always had a very strong interest on many levels with what's called sleep and dream practices, different traditions, spiritual traditions in particular, yogic traditions, such as Yoga Nidra, the Tibetan sleep and dream yogas, and there's also, there's probably many that I'm not even mentioning or knowing, but also in the South American shamanic traditions, they have sleep and dream practices. But this is a way to, you could even say, meditate or work with your consciousness at these altered states, such as when we're dreaming and sleeping, but to kind of maybe make the explanation short and just to the point. There's certain energetic centers or locations in your body that you can focus on before you fall asleep that will allow you, through practice, to become either one, lucid or awake while you're dreaming without actually physically waking up. So then you can start manipulating or changing the dream scene, or just simply be there, but in an awakened state. And also, there's also an energy center you can focus on so that you can become aware during the deep sleep state where there's no images. And that's actually considered a prelude, or even a similar state of consciousness to what's considered an awakened or fully embodied state of consciousness, or an enlightened state of consciousness is similar to the deep sleep state of consciousness. So the practice is, before you fall asleep, if you want to become lucid during the dream state, you imagine, you bring your awareness to your throat chakra or throat center. You would imagine a red sort of marble of light, maybe 3 centimeters in size, or whatever feels most comfortable. And then you just focus on that for 2 minutes, in a bright way. Then you just let it dim and then let it fade out so that you can fall asleep. So if you keep focusing it on too brightly, you may keep you up. So you do want to fall asleep. And what this does yogically or energetically is it brings the energy in your consciousness to this location in your energy field. And they've found through yogic research, through hundreds or thousands of years, that this allows your consciousness to wake up during the dream state without waking up physically. Then, just in short, if you want to become aware during the deep sleep state, before you fall asleep, you imagine a blue marble of light, maybe the same size, at your heart center. And the exact location is in the central channel, which is a vertical channel that runs from the top of your head, the crown chakra, in front of your spine, to the root chakra, which is at the perineum. So if you can imagine that blue marble of light inside that channel, that would be ideal. Or if you can't quite get there, just anywhere in your heart's area. And then you imagine it for 2 minutes very brightly, this blue marble, and then let it dim, then let it fade. And this will lead to people through practice becoming aware during the deep sleep state.
Yes, and what I found during, because I did the course with you, is that it changed also the awareness during the wake state. So while I was living my everyday life, I realized that I had a new awareness. So I think that it's, of course, a wonder to experience a lucid dream for someone who has never had one, but this is going even in a very deep, in depth in our awareness, because the reality in the waking state is becoming totally different. So I think it's something really, really useful, like 360 degrees useful. Yeah. So I know that you have a free gift for the audience. Could you please talk about it?
Yes, this will be very similar to what you experienced in the short session, but it will be a full 50-minute healing session, which you can use repeatedly to bring in these Arcturian energies, and using kind of the most latest Arcturian healing method frequencies. So whatever your healing intention is, you just state it in the beginning and then play the MP3. And just so that people understand how that works energetically, there's nothing on the MP3 itself. So it's not the sound, the physical sound is not this type of energy. That would be maybe a physical frequency, but it's the fact that you're using the MP3 to link to the information field that's in the non-physical realm. That was created, from the Arcturian frequencies and the intention that was set when the recording was made. So and then that brings in the energies. So each time you use the MP3, it won't be a repeat of the session. You'll be bringing through the new energies each time. So you can utilize it as much as you want to help your either spiritual growth or healing process.
So thank you so much. This is really wonderful. And I think that with this interview, we can really give a message for everyone who has always thought to be a scientific person looking just at the 3D reality. I've nothing against scientists, I'm one of them. But just to let them know that there is more to know. There are ways to expand our consciousness. There are ways in which we can interact with energy. So for this, I felt your presence was so important because coming from us with a strong scientific background, maybe there is a little more, I don't say trusting, but maybe they start thinking about it, that everyone can change and can expand this consciousness. So, Jean, really thank you very much. It has been a real pleasure. And I hope that I will see you again in another time.
Oh, yes, yes. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure too. And thank you for insightful comments and questions. And I'm very glad that I was able to connect with people through this telesummit video.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Thank you to the audience. Thank you, Jean. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.